Right, round da, croeso. Welcome to the Planning and Regulatory and Licensing meeting, 9th of April 2025. Please note that today's meeting may be recorded. This recording will be broadcast on the authority's website and may be used for training purposes by the Democratic Services Department. All attendees will be in view of the camera, and by attending you are consenting to being filmed and the possible use of those images and sound recordings being used as outlined above. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Okay, thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and prejudicial interest in respect of matters contained in this agenda in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government and Finance Act 1992 relating to the Council Tax, the Local Government Act 2000, Council's Constitution and the Members' Code of Conduct. Note, members are reminded that they must identify the number and subject matter that their interest relates to and signify the nature of the personal interest, and where members withdraw from the meeting as a consequence of disclosure of a prejudicial interest, they must notify the chair when they leave. Are we any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Before we go to the open session, I will shortly hand over to David Cross, who will present the application to the committee. We will then have a speaker in support of the application who will address the committee with a time limit of 5 minutes, and then questions can be asked by members of the committee. We'll then go on to open session planning application P240265 Unit 1 Paisley Business Park, Pant Industrial Estate, Merthyr Tydfil, CF48, 2SR, to consider a report from the Director of Governance and Resources. Dave?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just screen share the presentation as well. Bear me a second. Is that coming up on the other side? So this application relates to a recently constructed unit that forms part of the Paisley Business Park within the Pant Industrial Estate. The property currently has permission to be used within the B1, 2 and 8 use class for light general industrial uses and for storage and distribution. Permission is now sought to change the use of that property to a veterinary practice, which is deemed to be a sui generis use, meaning it's one that doesn't fall within those defined use categories. The proposal itself would largely involve internal works to the property to accommodate the vets, which would include the installation of a mezzanine floor to provide a first floor level. The ground floor area of the vets would accommodate a reception, a waiting area, 4 consultation rooms, operating theatres and various other facilities such as a kennel, cattery, dental, x-ray and isolation rooms, which forms part of the services they would like to provide. At the first floor level, the proposal includes an office space, a manager's office, a call centre and a meeting room, together with storage areas and welfare facilities for staff. The existing roller shutter door on the front elevation would be replaced with a large glazed facade, which would then serve the new reception and main entrance to the vets. Following the consultation exercise, an objection has been received from the Head of Engineering and Highways due to concerns in respect of insufficient parking for staff and visitors, which in their view gives rise to highway safety concerns. As a result of the publicity exercise, 2 letters of objection were received, which questions the need for more vets in the area, raises concerns with the potential amenity impact on neighbouring properties, and the lack of parking provision as well. It's been set out in the report that the principle of development is acceptable and would provide some employment opportunity. The proposal would also would not have any significant adverse impacts on ecology or the local environment, and the alterations to the front of the property would not have a significant adverse impact on the character or appearance of the site or surroundings. Therefore, the main concerns relate to the lack of parking provision to serve the development, which would give rise to indiscriminate and ad hoc parking along the main highway, which in turn would also have an impact on the parking and traffic movements in the area. The proposal would employ 7 members of staff, and it's set out on their plans that 5 dedicated parking spaces would be provided. As set out in the report, it's considered that there would be a considerable shortfall of parking provision, of which the highway engineers have indicated that at least 15 parking spaces would be required based on the number of staff and the general sort of scale and provision of the veterinary practice. Accordingly, it's been recommended in the report that the application be refused on page 15 of the report for highway reasons. Just to go through some of the slides to illustrate the proposal. So the plan before you now, the big red block is essentially the building in question, and then the smaller red areas are the parking areas which serve that property. To give you a bit of context of where it is within the Pant Industrial Estate, the site itself is an out-of-date Google image now, because obviously the development's fairly recently been completed, but it's this grassed area here which is now developed. To give you an idea of what's taken place in the absence of a better aerial, so on the left you can see the property in question with the parking spaces allocated around it. The illustration on the right sets out the context of how the site's been developed since. So the top property here, Unit 1, is the proposed veterinary, and then you've got the remaining units there, which I think are 14 in total, serving the site, and each property has its own parking reserve for that unit. The plans before you here now illustrate what they're looking to do internally. The approved plans essentially shows it as just essentially like an open warehouse with a roller shutter on the front, and I think a little office on the one side. So the proposal would obviously introduce a number of internal partitions to provide the different facilities. So on the left, you've got the plan illustrating the ground floor plan. The roller shutter area is here, where you can see that would be changed to a glass facade. So you have your reception, waiting area. There are 4 consulting rooms to see the veterinary practitioners, and then elsewhere on the floor you've got various other facilities that they would utilise. So you've got a dog kennels, a cattery, there's 2 operating theatres, there's an X-ray and dental room, as well as an isolation room. On the first floor, which would be created with the mezzanine floor, there are a number of office facilities provided with a separate manager's room. There's a small call centre there, meeting rooms, as well as storage and staff welfare facilities. The elevations here are essentially of the front of the building, and as you can see on the left, that's what was essentially approved and is in place at the moment, is a roller shutter, and what they're looking to replace that with then is the glazed frontage. I've got a few photos just to give you a clear impression. So the 2 images are essentially the same building, just they're slightly offset. So you can see on the left the roller shutter, which would form the new entrance into the building. You can see there's just to the left of that, there's 2 parking spaces. There's a parking space in this kind of sort of lay-by feature, and on the photo on the right, where you've got another entrance to the building as it stands, there's 2 parking spaces there, with 1 being for disabled users. Just to the right of that image, you can see there's the main entrance into the site, leading onto the main highway. The photos here essentially just show that there are parking spaces elsewhere within the Paisley Park, but they are allocated to and numbered specifically then to the relevant industrial units. And then finally, a couple of slides, photo slides there of the sort of issues that are taking place at the moment. I don't know if how clear they are for you, but essentially, if you were to visit the road around the site, you'll see that there's a number of cars parked all along both sides of the road in some cases. The majority of them do park on the pavements, and I think that's in part because you get a number of lorries that pass through, and they need to ensure that there's sufficient manoeuvring ability for them. Often round corners and things, they have to take wider corners. So this is in part what stems from the highway concerns. As I say, they've got 5 parking spaces at the moment, and based on the CSS Wales parking guidelines, which is slightly different to the assessment that the highway engineers have set out, we compared the proposal essentially to like a care home, which or like a clinic, facility, which we thought was had some comparabilities, and that would suggest that the 5 parking spaces they've got shown on the plans there may potentially cater for the staff, providing there wasn't that much more staff than what they've stated. That would then suggest that all the parking requirements for all customers coming and going would essentially be all accommodated on the highway or within the other circulation areas of the Paisley Park, which could then put also pressure on the other units, which may also occasionally have more visitors than anticipated. So that in all, that would put a lot more pressure on the highway, which already at times appears to be quite congested in areas, and may then have impact on the free flow of traffic, particularly large articulated lorries, especially if people are parking on corners or near corners and junctions. Bearing in mind that the other 13 units within that Paisley Park would also still continue to be industrial. Their permission is still for B1, B2 and B8 use. So you may still get large vehicles serving those uses. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. We now go to the public speaking element of the meeting. Speakers in support of the application will address the committee. You've got a time limit of 5 minutes. I will give you time just to introduce yourself. If both of you wish to speak, you have to split the 5 minutes up between the two of you. We will give you a 30-second warning when your time's almost up, okay? So I hand you over to Rhian Nichols.
Hello, and thank you for your time. I'm Rhian, and I've been a veterinary surgeon for nearly 12 years. I've spent more than 8 of these working in Dowlais, for the majority of which I was the clinical director at the practice there. In your consideration of my application, I would like to draw your attention to the copies of the report that have been provided for you to reference in reviewing my application. It can be seen from this that it has met every relevant condition with regard to such an application, and also Future Wales, the national plan. The only objection is made by the head of parking and highways based on the lack of parking provision. In my attempt to address this, I have engaged with an industry respected advisor. Using industry recognised software, the Trip Rate Information Computer System, TRICS, we have provided strong evidence that the parking is adequate for my proposal and that I actually need less parking than some of the current approved classes of use. For me, I think the most salient point is that a tray counter such as Screwfix or a call centre could occupy this unit without any requirement for any of planning permissions or changes of use, and the TRICS software model has shown these to be significantly more intensive operations that would require far more parking than the veterinary practice that I'm proposing. Veterinary practice visits are almost all by appointment only, other than the occasional true emergency, which further supports efficiency of the parking demand and the traffic flow, which is something that a tray counter has no control over. This, coupled with there being clear policy efforts to reduce parking numbers to encourage sustainable travel, in my opinion, makes a veterinary practice more suitable than some of the current allowed classes of use. In the current economic climate and with strong public opinion regarding corporately owned veterinary practices, I believe that the constituents of Merthyr Tydfil would benefit from a new independently owned veterinary practice. Currently, all other veterinary practices in Merthyr are corporately owned, and it would offer the pet owners of Merthyr a competitive choice to have an independent practice amongst them. I do note that a concern was raised by a member of the public that there are enough vets in the area. However, having worked in the area for so long, I do know that there are a significant number of pet owners who travel to Brecon to get their pets seen by a vet. The charity clinic in Abercanid closed not due to a lack of requirement, but due to the charity reallocating funds, which left many pets without veterinary care. I strongly feel that there is a need for more veterinary services in Merthyr, and I do feel really passionately about opening a new independent practice here, but it is proving to be very difficult to find a suitable facility, and the unit at Paisley Park would be perfect. I do plan to employ 7 staff, which would include 2 full-time vets, myself would be one of those, 2 full-time and 1 part-time registered veterinary nurse, a receptionist and a practice manager. Not all staff would be on site all day every day, because the full-time staff would work 4 10-hour days. Finally, this application would create jobs and make use of a unit that is currently sat empty, has been sat empty since it was built, and may well continue to sit empty for some time, as we are aware that there's been very little interest from Class B use businesses for these units. Thank you for listening, and I hope I can count on your support.
Thank you very much. Have I got any questions for the applicant for clarity? Declan Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, how many members of staff, because the only reason that the planning department are against this is for highway safety, nothing else. So just want to ask the question, how many staff will be on site at any one time, do you think?
So I've done a sort of a mock rota to have a look at this, and most days there'd be a maximum of 5 staff. There is a day where 1 day a week where there may be 6, but it'd be a maximum of 5 staff on most days, and there is some capability for practice manager to work from home, so holidays and things 4 to 5.
Okay. I've gone up there to have a look, and it's a lovely area, but there are only 5 parking spaces. Can I just ask, how do you see that fitting in? Because obviously you've got 4 consultation rooms, so would that be 4 people in there at any one time plus the staff? So I'm just thinking, where do you think people are going to park? So I know it's a difficult question, but it's something I got to ask. Yeah.
So I suppose being sort of completely open and everything with this is, I'm hoping to employ some people from the area who may be able to travel in sort of sustainably. 2 of the employees are actually sort of live together that I'm hoping to get, so they would travel in together. With regards to sort of clients arriving and things, there is scope for outside of the building, where there are 2 spaces down the side of the roller shutter doors, that those staff cars could be blocked in, because you could park 2 cars behind there with no obstruction to the highway or anywhere else, no problems with deliveries for myself. So we could mark those cars as you can actually park behind them. It causes no issues with the parking elsewhere on the site or approach to the building, just because of the space that's available there. And of course, if you have got staff there, we're going to be there all day from morning to evening, so first to arrive and last to leave as such. It's not official parking, but it does give you sort of two more available spaces. There is also some space on and around the site where there's not a marked space that you could use. I know other units are potentially going to look at sharing those, but there is a degree, I think, on any sort of site where people move and park between different spaces and things. There is, as you say, I suppose, the surrounding highway and spaces on that park where where clients would probably access it. We all do it when we drive somewhere. You look for somewhere to park. If you don't see a parking space, you find somewhere that's safe, that's no double yellows. I've been up there myself to assess and have a look, because obviously I want to be comfortable that if I'm going to open a business there, that I feel that there's adequate parking, safe parking, and I felt that there's been plenty of space. I've been there a few times at different times of the day to assess it and see what the traffic and the parking availability is like. Otherwise I wouldn't have proposed it if I didn't feel it was suitable and doable.
Okay, and I think within the report you mentioned that it's pre-booking appointments only.
Yes, yeah.
So if this were to pass, this would be something that you would keep an eye on, parking if there were to be parking issues in the area.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Salmon. Councillor Clive Jones, is this a question to the applicant for clarity, or is it to anybody else?
Well, I think it's only the applicant could answer this question, Chair. I couldn't find it in the report, but I presume that you will have deliveries there for all sorts of things. And going back to the points that Councillor Salmon made, so that there's the deliveries, if you could tell me what the frequency of deliveries would be. And that really is the one thing that I'd like to know. But what I was going to ask as well is, from my knowledge of using other veterinary surgeries, because I used to have cats, when they die, a lot of people take the cats to a vet to have them cremated. Somebody's got to come there to pick up the bodies and bring the ashes back, for example. And if somebody wants a prescription that is urgent, that's outside the appointment, they would be coming back and forth. So there's bound to be other moments other than the appointments that you would be making.
Yeah, sure. So deliveries, first of all, you're quite right, deliveries. We tend to order in veterinary industry from one main supplier. So your bulk of your deliveries is usually one daily delivery. Sometimes it's less depending on how urgent your deliveries are. But all of your medications, your drugs and supplies tend to come in through one main supplier. So you're looking for that sort of thing as one delivery a day. Obviously on initial setup there'll be some equipment and things arriving, but that's going to be at the start. But day to day, once it's actually open and running to clients, you have your daily delivery of medications and things, all your consumables coming from one supplier. With regards to cremation services, yeah, we have cremation services that come and collect deceased pets to take for cremation. That's going to be a once a week. They're kept and held in a cold store until collection. So they come once a week to collect, and at that time when they're collecting the deceased, they then drop off the ashes that are returned at that time. So that's a sort of once a week collection delivery on the same day there. You are right, people will come to collect medications and things. Those tend to be relatively, I suppose, swift visits as such. There's no getting away from it. People will need to park to do that, but it's not going to be a long wait of sitting and waiting. They come in, they collect the medication, pay at reception and leave. So they're relatively quick visits.
And could I just have clarification? You mentioned there's 3 ancillary staff.
Yeah.
How many nurses will you have working there? I presume you'll have a receptionist as well?
Yeah.
So of how many of those will be part-time?
So there's going to be two full-time registered veterinary nurses and 1 part-time. So your 1 part-time will be in on the 2 days that your full-time are having their days off. So 2 nurses in each day, and then a receptionist then to cover your reception desk.
So there could be an occasion when there's taking sickness, holidays, training. They could be all of them there at any one time, perhaps, or is that unlikely?
I think think that's quite unlikely. There's always the possibility, but obviously everybody have their day off through the week, and you have the staff spread to cover those days, because we do the way that most veterinary practices like their full-time staff to work is 4 10-hour days. So there are days where you have lesser staff. Everybody's involved with answering the phones in a smaller practice like this, so that you all act a bit as a receptionist and things. Your nurses answer your phones, your reception answers the phones, nurses deal with the front desk. So everybody does a little bit of everything there. But yeah, if there's holiday, you tend to just adjust your diary accordingly, so you don't book as much work if you've got people on holiday, or you'd get a locum member in to cover it, but you wouldn't end up with even more team members. It would be a sort of a static team number.
And how many would be working a 10-hour day? Is it just the vets?
So the vets and the nurses and the receptionist, yeah. So on the mock rota that I've done, you'd have daily 4 to 5 staff in.
What time would they start and finish then?
Start at 8 in the morning and
Right.
finish at 6:30 in the evening.
Okay, and there'll be, it's not proposed, it don't mention it here, that there'll be any Saturday morning working.
No, we
You
don't
don't
plan
antici-
to do that at
you
the
don't-
moment, no.
Anticipate that'll ever come about.
No, I would really hope not. There's quite big recruitment issues within the veterinary industry, and Saturday morning working has sort of gone out of favour a lot, so it's not something I would be looking to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have we other questions to the applicant? No? Okay, other officers got any closing comments?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to come back on a couple of things. In terms of the discussion on staff, accept the point that there might be 7 members of staff, potentially up to 5 at any one time. Part of our concern is that this doesn't seem to be reflected in the proposed plans. There are 4 consulting rooms as well as a number of other facilities, which suggests that either that it would be underused, which is perhaps what's being suggested, but that would also suggest that there's room for the business to expand. So if there are only 2 vets at the moment, there's certainly capacity there for 4 vets, because you've got 4 consulting rooms. There's also a call centre, a manager's office, so there'll be times, even if they're not there all the time, there's other staff there. So to us, it doesn't seem to be commensurate of what's the staff requirements based on what provisions are being made in the building. There were suggestions that other parking arrangements could be put forward, which might ease some pressures, such as people parking behind other parking bays. That's not something we would encourage. That goes to the heart of what we're saying about ad hoc parking. That may interfere with turning manoeuvres, and if you've got deliveries and there's other cars parked in the way, that causes problem. The other issue in relation to parking was that it was suggested that parking may be flexible elsewhere within the park, and that you could park in front of other units. The concern for us would be on that is that permission was granted for this business park with allocated parking. So if there's now going to be a shortfall of parking, people parking in other bays, that could interfere with those businesses and just exacerbate those problems. The other point just to highlight in terms of, the fact that the customers would be all pre-booked, that may well be the case. There may be an increase in the future with people coming to pick up medicines, or there may be more people are encouraged to go there during emergencies because other places aren't available. So that would be very difficult for us to control. And obviously, if it becomes successful and popular, that could also attract more customers. And at the moment, based on the parking provision, it would appear to us that there would maybe enough parking for staff, but there would be no parking then really for customers. Chair.
Thank you. We now go on to committee debate, so questions as normal. Councillor Clyde Tovey.
In the Pant Industrial Estate, I go by quite a lot. Are there different parking recommendations for this application to Greggs? Because as you know, Greggs have a far greater turnover of people than this application, and yet Greggs got approved last year. Are there different criteria for parking?
Yeah, the different parking standards for the different use classes in planning terms. That's why essentially there's a different requirement now for the vets than there was to the industrial use that was granted as a whole for Paisley Park.
All right, thanks.
Councillor Clive Jones.
I wonder if you could go back to the photograph of the actual units, please. That's the one. That's the one.
Which one? This one?
There's two of them, is it?
That's not the
That's the vet. That's where they want the vet.
Right. So I need to really get clear in my mind exactly where these spaces are at the moment, because you're talking about two on one side of the building, and is it three on the other? Am I right?
In total, there's 5. So you've got on the left-hand picture.
Yeah.
You've got 2 to the side at the end of the road there.
Yeah.
You've got the sort of paved area.
Right.
That's a parking space.
Right. Can you stop there? So whose space is that there? The parking space.
That's for this unit.
All right. So you can get.
If I show you the
right.
first plan, perhaps this will help a little bit as well on the parking. So the image on the right is the approved layout that the site's been developed to. So unit 1, which is for the vets, is here.
Right.
So as I showed you, there's the 2 to the left of the front entrance. You've got the 2 to the right, and then that's that pavia area. And you can see that's numbered 111, and then the others are numbered then to respond to the relevant units.
Right. So you're talking the report, it's saying it's needed a total of 17 spaces. So where are all the others going to be placed?
That's our concern. So we've got 5 spaces there. If we compared, so the parking guidelines doesn't have a specific use for vets, but they are all categorised into similar types of uses. So we've compared this in relation to the same as like a sort of a clinic, basically, where you might have people coming and going, people waiting and things. Based on that, there would be a need for a number of parking spaces for the practitioners. That comes up to at least 5 parking for staff, and then there would be a need for 12 parking spaces for customers, which is based on the number of practitioners. The highway engineers looked at it in a slightly different way in the absence of that guidance as well, and they essentially said, well, there's 4 veterinary surgeon rooms, so we'd expect 1 space for each of the vets, for each of the practitioners, and then they would expect 3 ancillary, 1 space, sorry, what have I put in here, sorry. A minimum of 15 parking spaces to accommodate 4 veterinary surgeons and nurses, practitioners, 3 ancillary staff, and 8 customers. And what they were looking at is if you've got 4 practitioners, you would potentially have 1 customer being dealt with at the time, and then you would have 1 customer, perhaps even by appointment, arriving a few minutes before waiting before to be seen. So you would have at least 8 customers, which is slightly less than obviously what the parking guidance would suggest. So from our point of view, there's a relaxation there, arguably, based on the fact that it'd be largely appointment only to 15.
So whether it's 10 or 12, and the spaces that we saw in the other photograph have all gone because the staff are there. Where exactly would they park? Outside the area of that unit, on the road, which I presume is what we're talking about, and you've got.
I'll show you the photo of the streets. So the photo at the bottom right is essentially the site. So it's,
Right.
at the moment, that was a point when it was not developed.
Right.
So you've got some capacity to park along the street there, but you've got, you know, big open, big turning areas there for lorries for the adjoining units. But already you can see that cars generally park on the pavements, which is not good practice anyway, because obviously they're meant to be reserved for pedestrians. And if you're looking to encourage sustainable movement, that sort of impinges on that. The bottom left picture is at the far end of the road, where you can see a lot of vehicles already get jammed into the corners, and then it makes it a bit more difficult then for large vehicles. In respect of the site itself, you've got, obviously it's not shown in this illustration, but you've got the gateway into the park itself. So if people are encouraged to park either side of that, if the other units do have lorries or deliveries, then they've obviously got to deal with that. So that's part of the concern that highways have about this ad hoc parking. But as I say, I think it looks to me that the majority of it would have to be accommodated along the highway.
Right. I'll come to the large lorries in a minute, but if you go back to when we showed the unit, where there's other units, keep going. Was it that one? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The other units there, are they all fully occupied as industrial units? Is every one of those units occupied now?
As far as I know, no. I'm not sure exactly how many have been occupied, but from the photos that I've seen from the case officer, it doesn't look like many of the units are occupied at the moment.
Right. So if that's the case, and they've only got limited amount of parking allocated for each one, when that's fully occupied, there's going to be a hell of a lot of vehicles back and forth there.
Yeah, and if
staff back and forth apart from
if you
deliveries.
imagine all of the units, all their staff are utilising the allocated parking for all the different units. If some of those units had an extra visitor which they couldn't accommodate, you know, that would soon add up. Even if it's just one or two, that would soon add up across the 14 units there. Even if that's an extra 10, you know, or six or 10 on the highway, then on top of the vet proposal, that, you know, that could become quite congested.
Yeah. Coming to the larger vehicles, on page 13, the first full paragraph down, it's the engineering highways manager who is referred to. And I quote, it's noted that proposed VETS is located within an established industrial area where large vehicles often move around the site, which requires sufficient room to manoeuvre around junctions and along the highway. So, because of the industrial use, you're going to have vehicles of all sizes back and forth there on a regular basis. And from what is said there, the engineering highways managers and staff have got concerns about these large vehicles, which I presume would be back and forth on a very frequent basis.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, I've just scrolled back to the aerial photograph so you can sort of see the wider context. The site itself is, the highway serving the site is a through road as well. So it's not limited to just the traffic for those. You may get lorries that go there as a way of turning around,
Yeah.
you know, in the estate.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Lee Davis.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the parking, you said 17. How do you come to that figure?
It's set out in the report. Essentially, it's one space per practitioner. So we took the view that there was up to four potential practitioners based on the plans. Okay. There's one space per 3 ancillary staff member. So we took the view based on 7 members of staff. It wasn't itemised as to what that makeup was. So we took the view that that was 4 4 practitioners, 4 spaces, 3 remaining, which would be ancillary staff. So that was the 5 spaces then for the working requirements. And then it's three customer spaces per practitioner.
Okay. In terms of the other vets you mentioned in the report, it says Medivet and Victoria Pets. Victoria has 12 spaces. I'd like to differ, I beg to differ that it does have 12 spaces. I go to that vets, but they are showing us 22 members of staff across their 2 sites. So you're obviously, if you split them between their 2 sites, it's 11 staff. So, I don't think they have 12 spaces, but it works there. Have you checked to see they have 12 spaces?
I mean, we've got to assess the application on its own merit.
No, it's in the report, or there is 12 in here.
The highway engineers, when they looked at the highway assessment, there was a couple of sites that were reviewed. They took the view that there was more parking provided for those sites, and that there was only a small number comparable sites presented. Because I think there was one related to something up in Scotland, I think was what the highway engineer referred to. I mean, based on it seems reasonable to me that if you've got 4 practitioners, whilst there may be an element of car share, our concern is that there's a propensity for more than 7 staff at this site, because there's a lot of facilities there being provided. But based on 7 staff, we would be looking at 5 parking spaces, so that even takes into account to some extent that they may car share. Yeah, but that doesn't take into account then, the number of customers.
Yeah, I get that, but it does say in here that the other vets are not too far away. That they've got 12 spaces, which I beg to differ that there's not 12 there, but they've also got a lot more staff than they are proposing as well. So
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Michelle Jones.
Thanks. Can you go back to the previous slide for me? I think it was like an artist's drawing. Yeah. At the bottom, on the right-hand side, where we can see the 2 trees, the green blobs, are they parking spaces there?
What, the 2 green, the
The
trees?
2 green trees, but next to those on either end, it looks like they are parking spaces.
Those there are, I would say, are the pedestrian access to the front of the units.
Ah, right, okay. I just wanted clarity on whether they were perhaps potentially additional parking spaces that could be utilised.
I would imagine there's curb edges. I haven't looked at that specific parking arrangement as such, but I would imagine...
We haven't got an aerial view of that, do we? No.
No, but
okay.
Looking at I think we've got some photos of some of the other units.
Because the only aerial view we seem to have at the moment is of when it wasn't.
So a lot of the parking areas are curb edged. So I would imagine that where the footpath is there'll be a curb edge.
Is there any opportunity for us to utilise this area and make additional car parking spaces?
Back to that drawing. It shows us a disabled bay on the left-hand side.
I know, and it looks like there's numbers, and I was wondering if they were allocated car parking spaces.
They all look like parking bays to me.
Well, those 2 that you referred to either side of the trees, I would say they're not parking spaces.
No, I didn't mean the...
Oh, sorry.
No, I meant all of those little
row.
squares or rectangles. They look like car parking spaces. So I wanted to know if they were car parking spaces, and if they were, who were they allocated to? Or if the other units in Paisley Park are currently empty, would there be any opportunity for our applicant to perhaps purchase more?
Well, the parking spaces on that plan are numbered, as shown in
I couldn't see that.
Some of the other photos you can see that they're numbered, so they are specifically allocated to the individual units. So, for instance, they're across the bottom, because they're smaller units, they've each got 2 parking. So there's 2 for 12, 2 for 13, 2 for 14.
Ah, I see. So right to the bottom, they are further units.
Yeah, these are all smaller units across the bottom there. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
As to whether there's capacity for them to acquire other parking spaces, I mean, that's not before us as part of the proposal. But then the problem would be is that when we considered the industrial park at the time, we would have been making an assessment that each of those units have got 2-3 parking spaces each.
So those tiny little units have all been allocated 2 car parking spaces, yet the huge units have only been allocated 5.
The larger ones, yes.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't seem fair.
I mean, part of the use,
Based
it's the
on that.
standards, yeah, because it's a bit more, I guess, generic with business B uses, because, for instance, a B8 use would be storage and distribution. So you may not actually have much staff, but you'd have a large area then to accommodate all your stocks.
Okay, can I also just ask as well, can we go back to the drawing of the actual unit and how the area is laid out, for example, with the staff rooms, etc. Yeah, the first, if you go up, the floor plan, thanks. That's the one. I just wanted, the applicant said about the cold store of where they would need to keep the deceased animals. I just wanted to know where that was.
I assume it's probably the morgue here, and there's a small
morgue.
Small in there.
Where is it? No.
Can you show us?
Can you see my mouse?
No. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Clive Jones, you got a further question?
Yes. We've been advised today by the applicant that most of the staff will be working, those that are coming, a 10-hour day. When the application was submitted, was that information attached and with that application?
I think the opening times would have been set out on the application form, yes.
So you knew then, right from the start, that staff would be working, a lot of them, not all of them.
We wouldn't know so we were informed that there was up to 7 members of staff to be employed, but I don't think it was set out as to whether they were full-time, part-time, or how long their working hours for the individual members of staff were.
So the information we've had today specifically is that most of them, not all of them, when they come in to work, will be working a 10-hour day. Is that new information as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I don't think that was set out previously.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Any comments? Can we have somebody to move the report, please? Yeah, seconder. Okay.
Before you do actually go to the vote, can I just explain, because it's the same as last month, Officer's recommendation is that the application be refused for the reasons set out on page 14, which I won't read out, page 15, sorry, which I won't read out to you because it's in front of you. So if you vote yes, you are voting that the application be refused. If you vote no, you will be voting against Officer's recommendation. So is everyone clear in relation to the yes and no votes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, that's a split vote, Chair, so you actually have the casting vote.
Okay. I'm going to vote yes.
So that is Officer's recommendation has been carried then. So it's been refused.
Okay. So we go on to the next items, 4 and 5, which are information reports. We go on to item 6, taxi licensing policies and vehicle conditions, CCTV policy, VPIS policy, and Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle conditions, to consider a report of the Director of Governance and Resource.
Are you happy with the planning officers and me to leave, Chair?
I am.
Marvellous. That's the answer I wanted.
I saw them go, Deck. I saw them go. I saw the applicant go.
Through the doors, you mean?
Yeah, okay. Joe?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay. Joe? Okay. Joe's gonna. Excuse me. Joe wants to do a report.
Thank you, Chair, members. So this report is in relation to the adoption of policies for the voluntary use of CCTV and VPIS systems, and then the subsequent minor amendments to our vehicle conditions. In March 2021, Welsh Government published a harmonisation guide for taxi and private hire vehicle licensing in Wales. Whilst it was recognised that new legislation is needed to address issues, the guidance encourages an aligned approach to taxi licensing across Wales to improve public safety consistently. Since the guidance was published, Welsh Government have worked with industry specialists to develop a policy template for the use of CCTV systems in taxi and private hire vehicles, and this was last updated in October 2024. This policy template allows for the voluntary use of CCTV systems, providing a standardised framework while simplifying the regulatory process. A draft CCTV policy based on Welsh Government's template is attached at Appendix A for members' consideration. Welsh Government also produced a policy template for VPIS systems. This policy template provides guidelines for proprietors to follow should they wish to install these systems in their vehicles, and a draft VPIS policy based on Welsh Government's template is attached to Appendix B for members' consideration. Currently, the Council's Hackney Carriage and Private Hire vehicle conditions require proprietors to seek approval to install any fittings, both inside or outside the vehicle. This means that each individual request has to come before this committee for consideration, with a subcommittee being held prior to allow verbal submissions from the vehicle proprietor. The adoption of these standard policies for voluntary use would streamline that process. Adoption of the policies would require a minor amendment to the vehicle conditions, and it is suggested that a section on CCTV and VPIS systems be included into those conditions as outlined in the draft amended conditions at Appendices C and D of the report. So the recommendations are at 2.1 that the adoption of the CCTV policy attached to Appendix A of the report be approved. 2.2 that delegated authority be given to the licensing manager in conjunction with the chair of Planning, Regulatory and Licensing Committee and the Legal Department, to make amendments to Annex A of the CCTV policy where technical changes to specifications are needed be approved. 2.3 that the adoption of the VPIS policy attached to Appendix B of the report be approved. 2.4 that the amendment to the Hackney Carriage vehicle conditions attached at Appendix C of the report be approved. And 2.5 that the amendment to the private hire vehicle conditions attached at Appendix D of the report be approved. Thank you, Chair. Members.
Thank you. Have we got any questions? Councillor Clive Jones.
Right. We got, I presume, some in the region of over 200 taxis for the company borough, or a lot more. Currently, at the moment, how many of the taxis have these systems installed in them?
None that we are aware of. There are a few, I think, which have dash cams,
right.
But in absence of a policy controlling the dash cams, which only record external footage but no internal and no audio, we haven't taken any action against those as is. But hopefully with this policy that would bring everybody into compliance.
Right. So installing CCTV is going to be helpful to whoever the driver is that?
I think CCTV obviously would help safety for the drivers, but also for the public as well.
Yes, because I'm fully aware that certain members of the public don't behave as they should when they get into a taxi, particularly when they've had, certain volumes of alcohol intake on a Friday or Saturday night. So that's one. Perhaps you can tell me exactly what a video point of impact system is, because CCTV, for me, is CCTV. Is this in addition to it, and exactly what does that do?
So basically, it is the technical term for a dash cam.
Right.
Basically, so the VPIS system policy would be purely for dash cams that record external footage from the vehicle, does not record internal footage, and does not record any audio footage.
Right. So for it to work properly, they would require both installed in the taxi, is that correct?
Depending on what they want out of the system, if they are happy to just have a dash cam recording external footage, no audio, and if that helps their insurance purposes, then obviously that's an option for them, and they then have to comply with the VPIS policy, which is perhaps less onerous in terms of data protection, etc., than the CCTV policy. But if they wanted to record audio or internal footage, then they would be required to comply with the more detailed CCTV policy.
Right. I mean, I would have thought, we've all seen images where there's no audio. Doesn't always tell you exactly what's going on. So, in my view, they would require that, so they got the full, not only the picture, but they can hear everything that's going on, because the way some of these taxi drivers are treated, not just in Merthyr Tydfil, but many other places in the United Kingdom, is appalling. And you're talking about minor amendments. Have you any idea, Joe, how much each of these systems cost? Is it something that...
That isn't something I have
Right.
to hand.
Because
Jones.
that's important, isn't it? Because I would have thought that a lot of the drivers would want one or both of these systems, either one, installed for their own benefit. But obviously there's a cost to it. And if the cost is prohibitive, they may be left in a situation where there's only a few of the taxis have the system, and the majority of vehicles don't.
That is correct. I think where we are as a licensing department, obviously at the moment we don't have vehicles who. I have two queries at the moment, one on a CCTV system and one on a VPIS system, which obviously I was waiting for this committee before seeing where I need to go with those. We don't have a lot of queries. Right, for example, the CCTV system, the template policy the Welsh Government developed, they worked closely with industry specialists to make sure the technical spec and everything was achievable, and that there are systems out there that can do what the policy says needs to be done. But I don't have costs.
And for those that decide to install it, from a licensing point of view, from your posts in licensing, are you able to use that evidence elsewhere as to the treatment?
So so the policy does stipulate that if either an authorised officer from the local authority or a police officer requests footage as a result of an incident, a complaint, etc., that if there's a CCTV system installed, the proprietor has a duty to provide that footage to us, so that it could potentially be used to deal with the complaint or investigation.
So those that have dash cam footage, is that currently cannot be used? I don't know, in the court process.
I am not sure is the answer. I don't know.
Dashcam would only show what's going on in front
Outside,
of the vehicle.
yeah, yeah.
So
Right.
yeah, if we had dashcam images of somebody behaving badly and it came before committee, yes, I would use that in court purposes.
Right.
Pass it to the police if it was a road traffic accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have thought that would be helpful to, yourselves
Definitely.
and the taxi proprietors as well. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. I think Clive asked the main one I was going to ask, which was the price on these units. The other question I have is that it's not mandatory for a taxi operator to have these, but at Annex C it does say, which is on page 45 of the report on ModGov, if the system is not operational, the vehicle must not be used for hire or reward until repaired. So obviously, people may be getting into the taxi. It's the reason behind it. People may be getting into a taxi because it says there's CCTV, and then there's no CCTV. They're not
Exactly
getting a
that.
true reflection.
Exactly
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
If a CCTV system is installed, signage has to be displayed, etc. So yeah, if that system isn't working, a passenger may be getting into that vehicle expecting that there is CCTV for their safety, and if it's not working, then obviously it's misleading. So that's exactly that.
So if an incident was to happen, and then where it has happened in clubs and pubs where this footage hasn't worked, if in a case like this, because it's you driver, one passenger, something like that, you'd come down hard on the driver really if they weren't able to produce.
It'd be a breach of
It would be a breach
conditions.
of
Yeah,
conditions.
yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions?
What?
A breach of conditions.
A breach of conditions.
Yeah,
Oh.
if there was an incident that we were trying to investigate.
Which is a
For a
change of
vehicle with
conditions.
CCTV, no, it would be a breach of conditions if it wasn't working.
Thanks.
Thanks. No other further questions?
Just a quick question in general. Is it ever likely in the future that this would be a condition on all taxis? To have CCTV? Has that been discussed anywhere?
Yes, so there is the ICO have ruled that to mandate CCTV systems in taxis and private hire vehicles, there has to be a justified need and evidence base for it. There were a number of councils in England who had mandated it, and then when this ICO ruling came out, they immediately made it voluntary instead. I think there's only one, I think it's Southampton Council, who have remain going against the ICO ruling. But as it stands, yeah, there has to be a evidence-based need for it to be mandated.
Thank you, Joe.
And of course, what Councillor Jones said about the price of these units, we don't know the price. Some people just maybe can't afford it.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Scott Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, in respect of if it did become obviously in some format mandatory, or obviously we did have any that were fitted to vehicles, would there have to be evidence provided that they were fitted professionally, or would it be something like, obviously, let's say Temu Special, you can buy it off Temu, 40 quid, and have it done? Because I know that obviously you can personally, because obviously previous working area, I know that you can get internal facing dash cams as well as external as one unit for as little as 75 quid. And then fitting on that ends another 75, 50, between 50 and 75 quid on top of that. So you're talking, Clive, as little as 150 quid to have a system fitted.
So in terms of the dash cam policy then, that is because it is only for systems that record externally. They have to comply with, it has to carry a CE marking, and it has to conform to a council directive or equivalent. In terms of the CCTV policy, myself, my licensing officers, we aren't CCTV experts. So what we have added to Welsh Government's template policy, which is based on what Newport have done, is included a declaration form that has to be completed and provided to the licensing department if CCTV is installed. That has to be signed by the vehicle proprietor, giving details of which vehicle the system has been installed into, and he signs a declaration to say that to the best of his knowledge or her knowledge, that the system meets the criteria met in the policy. It also has to be signed by the installer of the CCTV system. They are the experts. They are the ones who then sign the declaration to say that the system they have installed meets our policy. And it also then has a section for them to let us know who the data controller will be in case of queries from the ICO. So that is what we've done, because I couldn't look at a CCTV system in a taxi and say it met that technical spec. I don't have that knowledge. So that is the way we've suggested addressing that issue.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any comments? Oh, can somebody move the report then, please? Thank you. Thank you. We'll take it to the vote. Yeah, and that's been carried. We go to item number 7. Any business deemed urgent by the chair? I haven't. So we'll go on to the exempt item. And for the exempt item to be here, do we need a mover for section 100?
I move section 100, Chair.
Yes. And both Clives.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, can we have some? Yeah. Yeah. Right.